All right. Well, just to be mindful of time, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you again for joining us today. I'm going to pass it over to our presenter, Jamie Valderrama.
Okay, if I can unmute myself. There we go. Great. I am really excited to be here. I will warn you ahead of time. I just got back from a study abroad from South America, and so I picked up a cold, so I might occasionally have to mute to blow my nose, but that's the only reason I'm doing it. Otherwise, I feel great. And Amanda, thank you so much for inviting me. For me, this is that ultimate pay it forward when I have an opportunity to share this information, talk a little bit about our program that we have at ASU, and really, I'm going to be honest, this is completely about you. I know that you supervise student workers. I like to say that we can't give what we don't have. And truly, it's the modeling that we do that makes the largest impact on the people around us. So I want you to really take the material that we're going through, and I want you to personally apply it, look at it, how it works in your own life. You know, that whole self-reflection, self-awareness process is really kind of critical when we look at the dark and light pieces of who we are and how we move forward in this kind of chaotic, messy, beautiful, magnificent world. This is an incredibly informal presentation. So if you have questions, I'm going to naturally take breaks throughout this hour that we have together, and either Abby or Amanda, they'll look at the questions you have in the chat, and hopefully I can answer them. And truly, if you do have a question, please share it. If there's some clarification that you're looking for, I think that's really important that we can have a dialogue that is informal. And again, because this is about you. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen because I've got a presentation. Let's get it from the beginning. And I was just telling Amanda, this is working out really great because I'm so excited to present to you guys. And I'll be up in Flagstaff on Monday presenting to the Arizona Superintendent Association, doing a keynote for them. So it's this is a nice little way for me to kind of work back into my presentations after being out of country and everything. So the first thing I want you to think about, if I'm lecturing, whether it's my undergraduate or graduate courses, whether I'm out in the community, I always start everything with a what's good. And there's a reason behind it. I want you to, just for a minute, just for the sake of time, I want you to think to yourself, what is something that's good today? And it doesn't have to be big. It could be that you had an amazing cup of coffee or a great lunch, or you're wrapping up the day, or you got to sleep in a little bit, or a good conversation. And there's a reason I want you to do this. This entire thing we're going to talk about is a brain game. We're going to look at neuroplasticity. How do we rewire the brain so that our perceptions and perspectives change as we look at different situations that maybe traditionally would trigger us or put us into a heightened state of stress? And I'm going to get into stress in a moment. Stress is not a bad thing. I'll talk more about that a little bit later. But I want you to think about right now, what is good? I mean, what's good for me is that I have this opportunity to share the information. That's actually what's amazing for me. So everybody think about what is good for you. And I'm going to talk about why this is important that we do it. Imagine, so you're coming into this meeting on Zoom. You're like, this sounds fascinating. I'm really excited. You can just pretend that's exactly what you're thinking. And you're going to go get a cup of coffee or tea or whatever you need, right? As you come over to sit and listen to this for the next hour. But as you're coming towards the computer, you trip. And as you trip, you spill your coffee or your tea. And one of the things we have a tendency to do when we're hit with an obstacle or a challenge in life, we're like, are you kidding me? Like, this is an omen. This is like how the rest of my day is going to go. And a lot of times it is how the rest of our day goes. And so what I want you to do with this whole what's good is I want you to acknowledge and pay attention to the stressors or challenges you have in your life. If you spill your coffee, you know what? Throw a tantrum, jump up and down, rail at the universe. I want you to really physically and emotionally express how you feel about it. But then I want you to do something a little different. Instead of staying in that cycle that could perpetuate you more into a negative light the rest of your day, I want you to step back and go, well, okay, this was really hard and it sucked and it makes me angry and mad and sad, but what's good? And the minute you do that, what you start doing is training the brain to look for the positives, not just into the challenges or the negatives in our life. The minute you can say, well, okay, that was hard, but what's good? Gosh, I have a presentation I get to come and listen to, or, I have a family that loves me, or a job that I really enjoy. I also teach for ASU's Lifelong Learning Institute, and I had a 97-year-old participant in there. And I'm like, what's good? And she said, I woke up. right? I mean, it's all perspective. If you're 97, waking up is probably really good. And so the minute again you're doing that, you're making a conscious choice and you're rewiring the brain. And that's really what this is all about. You know, I work in the Watts College, which is public service community solutions. And a lot of the students, everybody I'm working with, are going into social service fields and they want to make a difference, but these can be really draining. And so I always tell them it's important that we acknowledge the hardship and the darkness. But bottom line, we can't fight darkness with darkness. We have to figure out what our light's going to be. We acknowledge, we pay attention to the challenges, but we don't necessarily live in them. So that's going to be my first challenge for you as you're going forward from this is can you, when you have hard moments, whether they're small hard moments or they're big hard moments, can you really process physically and emotionally what's happening? And then can you step back and say, but you know, what's good? So my name's Jamie Valderrama, as Amanda had let you know. I'm an associate teaching professor, and I'm also an undergraduate coordinator for our integrative health initiative. So that means that I coordinate and oversee all of our stress management courses where we look at the physiology and psychology of stress. I'm out of the Watts College and I'm housed in the School of Social Work. And it's really funny because Amanda and I go back way, way back. I used to teach high school. I taught high school for over 12 years. I taught biology, zoology, anatomy, physiology. I did student council, so I called that funology. And so when I ended up being at one point a teacher of the year for the state, at the same time I was working on my graduate work in integrative health modalities because I was teaching anatomy physiology and a lot of my students were really interested in going on into a medical career when they went on to college. And I was really trying to deepen the curriculum that I had. And it was interesting. So those two forces came together. I'm a teacher of the year. I'm working on my graduate work, and I'm having opportunities to travel around the state in the K-12 system and the 3 state universities, seeing what are really good leaders. And I was also in the business community. And it was interesting to me because inherently, these really great leaders I would see were already being mindful, even though they had no idea what that meant. They didn't know the verbiage, but they were very present and very aware, and they were able to self-regulate very quickly. And I'm going to talk about how that can be incredibly advantageous. So Amanda was actually one of my amazing student council students. As you can see, she's gone on and she's absolutely spectacular, but we had a lot of really great years together too, with just a leadership aspect on the campus of the high school that I taught at. So now I get to marry together the physiology and psychology. My undergraduate is degrees in biology. And so for me, it was really important to understand the why. The first graduate class I walked into, I will never forget because they said, well, we're going to breathe. And now I'm coming from a hard science major and I'm paying a lot of money, right, for my graduate work. And I'm thinking to myself, what do you mean we're going to breathe? Like I breathe every day. Are we going to go hug trees next? Which there's nothing wrong with hugging a tree. But for me, I was thinking, why? You know, one thing when I teach, it's so important to understand the relevancy. Why do we need to learn what we're learning? And at the time when I started doing this, because I've been with ASU now for 12 years, you know, we didn't have a lot of data on what was happening with the brain. We didn't really have that term neuroplasticity. And so for me, it was kind of like that street fight to figure out what is happening. I mean, it works, we know it works, but what's going on with the brain and the body with mindfulness, with meditative techniques? How is this really beneficial? And of course, now we've got a slew of data that's out there, but at the time we didn't. And so when ASU kind of recruited me to come in full time, one of the things I needed to do was, can I revamp all the curriculum as I'm developing this program to talk about the science and the why? Because if I can't talk about the why, I don't feel like anyone would buy in, especially if I look at engineering students or business majors. They're very analytically, you know, analytical thinkers. I teach in Homeland Security Emergency Management in the graduate program. I'm not going to have first responders doing this unless they can understand why they need to do it. And that's really what we'll be getting into. And that's who I am. So if we look at just the program itself that I'm coordinating and running, it's, you know, this semester, this past semester that we just wrapped up, and I'm sure you're as excited about that as I am, we had 55 sections on all of our campuses, online and ground, with over 3,300 students. And what's really unique about this is that they came from all different majors. So if I walked into a lecture hall, I would have maybe 15 or 20 different majors in there, and they would come in and they would look at one another and they would say, wait, like you're stressed too? And I love that because a lot of times we think that stress is only in certain parts of our lives, but we know this, that the reality is this is a very stressful world. And we have a lot of stress in all aspects, whether it's personal or professional. So really our ability to recognize the stress and then self-regulate really becomes a superpower. And it's interesting, the courses have gotten as big as they've gotten, and it's not because of our marketing, but students talking to one another, academic advising, saying, hey, listen, this is a skill set. If we can get deep in the box of responsive behaviors or tools to help with responsive behaviors, we know that students will have retention, that they're going to handle some of the obstacles in their life and understand that it's okay, that it's not necessarily always okay. In fact, I had a student say to me, gosh, a couple of semesters ago, he goes, Professor, I don't think it's meant to be this hard. And I'm like, oh, little friend, yes, it is meant to be this hard, right? Life's not social media. Life is up and it's down. It's up and it's down, and it's meant to be like that. That is not a bad thing. So when we talk about stress, here's the deal. Stress can be really, really good for you. In fact, we want to be stressed in certain situations. It just becomes detrimental when it controls you and you don't control it. So the whole goal here is to recognize what's the stress that we have in our lives, appropriately letting it into our lives, but making sure that we're controlling and managing it and we're self-regulating. And I'm going to talk about why it's so important we're not in a chronically stressed situation. So the name of this presentation is The Magic of Mindfulness, How to Train a Responsive Brain. Because again, this is a brain game. Physiology drives psychology, that drives physiology. So the minute we understand what's going on with the brain, we can understand, what's going on with the body, and we can understand why we're the reactive or we're responsive. And I always love to use this silhouette. It's of Kung Fu Panda. And if you haven't watched it, that's another homework assignment you have aside from the what's good. But I love Kung Fu Panda because it's a perfect way to look at what we're looking at. If you remember in the very first film, he is supposed to be this amazing ninja warrior, and he does not believe he is this person or this entity that's supposed to come and save all of these villages. So Master Oogway, who is his sensei master, takes him to the top of this hill, and he says something to him that I know you've all heard. He says, "Yesterday's history. Tomorrow's a mystery. Today's a gift. That's why it's known as the present." And what he's telling them is that we need to be here and now to become who we're capable of becoming. We have to get out of our heads. And so that's really one of the biggest goals we have as we go through these courses, my undergraduate and graduate, is how do we get out of our head to be the person we're meant to be at the highest level we're capable of becoming? And so think about, even in the brief time I've been talking, are you mindful or is your mind full, right? It's like, it's deep. Like you had no idea how deep this lecture was going to get, or presentation. I had a student probably 11 years ago in her review of one of the courses. It was so perfect what she said. She said, this was the hardest class I've taken, easiest class I've taken at ASU, and it was the hardest class I've taken at ASU. It was the easiest class because it was all about me. It was the hardest class because it was all about me. We really struggle sometimes with paying attention to those things within us that make us anxious or depressed or angry. In fact, I can guarantee that if you wake up in the morning and you feel really good, you have no problem saying, I feel really good today. But if you wake up in the morning and you have some anxiety or depression, how many of us wake up and we're feeling anxious and go, oh, there's some anxiety today. Like, this is great. Like, no, we don't like it. So we push it, we deflect it, we numb it, we distract ourselves. But the reality is, every emotion that you experience, from that anxiety to that joy, they're all incredibly vital and part of your life journey. You have to be able to acknowledge and own all of them, because the minute that you do, you now own them and they don't own you. And so a lot of times we can say, hey, the positive emotions, we have no problem sharing those. But when someone might say, well, what's going on with you? You might be like, I feel blah. Well, what the heck is blah? Are you feeling vulnerable? Are you feeling anxious? Are you feeling angry? Are you feeling depressed? And so the minute we can say, hey, well, this is anxiety in my body, just as easily as this is excitement or joy, We are now owning it. It may not be comfortable, but one of the big sayings in social work is we have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. We need to lean into the sharp edges. Like Carl Jung said, you can't get out without going through. And so being able to acknowledge and pay attention, even when they're not necessarily comfortable emotions, allows you to start really learning them and navigating them and respecting them. So again, that you reach that point where you own them and they don't own you. So you might be like, well, how does mindfulness tie into this? Like, what's the connection? Well, we now know from all of the data we have that really effective leaders are inherently mindful. Just like at the beginning of this, when I talked about when I was a teacher of the year for the state and going around to all these different schools and businesses, and I would see these really, really great educators and leaders inherently being mindful, even though they had no idea what it meant. To give you an example, a study out of Business Harvard, they wanted to look at what's a really good boss. And this is going to relate to you because you're working with these student workers and you're modeling to them. But what is a good boss? So we had one group of employees that said they hated their leader. They had another group of employees who loved their leader. They looked at two key hormones. They looked at testosterone, which is a leadership hormone, and they looked at cortisol, which is a stress hormone. What they saw with this was really interesting. The group of people who really, really loved their leader, when that leader encountered a stressful trigger at work, their testosterone went up. That meant that they put on that mantle of leadership, but their cortisol actually dropped. They became highly responsive. People are hugely drawn to that. Now, the group that did not like their leader, that leader, when they encountered stress at work, hey, their testosterone still went up. They were still putting on leadership, but guess what else went up? Yeah, cortisol. They became highly reactive leaders. People are incredibly uncomfortable with that. And so we look at we're leaders really in every aspect of our life, whether we're at home or whether we're at work. And we think about how are we handling some of the triggers that come across our desk? Are we reactive or are we responsive? Are we able to step back and self-regulate and get the brain into balance, which we'll go into in a minute? Or are we just completely flying off the handle? And that's part of the uncomfortableness of looking at the dark and light pieces of who we are. So you're like, Jamie, what's this magnificent word mindfulness? It just means that you're here and now without an expectation or a label. And that's a really hard thing to do because we're really good at expectations and labels. We have expectations about everything, how we think conversations should go, the relationships in our life should be, how this presentation should go. It's just what we inherently do. So to be able to lose that and say, I'm just going to be here and now, and I'm just going to intake this information and I'm going to let it percolate, process it, and I'm going to decide how I'm going to move forward with it. It's a really powerful thing to be able to do. And I always show a young child because children are really good at this. And it has nothing to do with the fact they're not little gurus or anything, but it's really brain development. Little children don't have that ability yet to catastrophize, if I can even talk, or, jump into the future of the past like we can as adults because of brain development. I mean, how many times have you seen a 5-year-old, right, going out into the playground and one 5-year-old says to the other, hey, let's play. And one says, hey, no, I got to process that Play-Doh incident. It was really traumatizing. I don't think I can play right now. No, they don't do that. It doesn't mean they don't experience trauma. But what it means is they're not constantly in the heads like we have a tendency to do as we get older and we develop that neocortex. So the question is, why is this important? Well, it's important because another study out of Harvard showed that the average American is lost in thought 47% of the day. I mean, think about that. That's almost half of your day where you're not present, where you're not in alignment with the body and the brain. Now you're like, where am I, right? Like if I'm lost 47% of the day, where am I at? This is the really interesting part. And this is our own ownership again, we have created neural patterns in our brain of ways that we default into certain thinking patterns. Some of us, when it gets really quiet, we're not actively engaged at work or talking to someone, we do something called rumination. And that's thinking about the past. It can be short term, it can be long term. It can be a trauma that you had in the past, like a car accident. It could be something short term where you were having a conversation with your boss and you felt like you just said something really stupid. And all you do is keep reliving that conversation over and over and over. Now, clinically, we know this can lead to depression. So if you're someone who ruminates, it's like you are constantly rehashing things that you can't change. It's like revisiting a car accident. You can't change the fact that the car accident occurred, yet you keep going back to the trauma of the accident. It's like going to the gym and all you do are bicep curls. If all you do are bicep curls, you get really, really strong biceps. If all you do is ruminate, you train the brain to default into this pattern. It's like the muscle. The stronger muscles you have, that's what we tend to default on. The same thing happens in the brain. If you are constantly reinforcing this neural path work to rumination, that's where you're going to go. And I want to add in here that, is it bad to think about the past? Of course, it's not bad to think about the past. You have to learn, to self-reflect, to grow. It becomes detrimental, and you're going to hear this a lot, when it controls you and you don't control it. Now think about that. Same with stress. Stress isn't bad unless it's controlling you and you're not controlling it. So that's rumination. We know it can clinically lead to depression, but some of you are going, Jamie, I get it. You know, ruminations, going to the past, short-term, long-term, but I don't do that. I worry about the future. I play the what if game. What if I can't pay this bill? What if this relationship doesn't work out? What if they discover I'm actually a fraud at work and I really don't know what I'm doing, right? That imposter syndrome. Let me tell you, the what if game is something that we're all very, very familiar with. And we know clinically it can lead to anxiety. And so that means that we're creating storylines that are non-existent. In fact, Mark Twain had a really good quote along the lines where he said that most of the tragedies that have occurred in our lives are those we've made up. And we're really, really good at making stuff up. It's like we go to the gym and instead of doing biceps, all we do are triceps. So we are strengthening the brain to default into a neural pattern of anxiety or projection. And so I have this perfect story. When I first started at ASU, it was probably my first or second year. I had a class downtown. It was the first day of classes. I had two students come in, and they were coming from a statistics class. And one said to the other, hey, do you know that there are only 3 tests in that stats class? What if I don't pass one of them? And I need this class for my major. I was listening to all of this because I've got my teacher ears on here, and the student continued to spiral. Within 30 seconds, the student is like, you know, what if this happens? What if that happens? I mean, they literally had gone from looking at a syllabi to living under a bridge in Tempe, and it was all based on what ifs. And so I was like, oh, I am so glad you are in this class. Now, the thing is projection. Is it bad to think about the future? Of course it's not bad. You have to think about the future to plan, right? To organize, to go to the direction and the goals that you want to go to. But when does it become detrimental? When it controls you and you don't control it. So you're like, okay, Jamie, ruminations, going to the past, it can clinically lead to depression, projections, playing the what if game, it can lead to anxiety. But Jamie, oh my gosh, like I gotta tell you, I am so good at both, right? Like I ruminate and I project. I am depressed and anxious. I have mastered both of them. And you might kind of giggle. And I gotta tell you, when I teach this with my undergrads and grads, there's a really uncomfortable laugh that goes through the room because they're like, oh God, how does she know? Here's the reality. You're not alone. This is what a lot of us do. I think the empowerment comes in recognizing that when we're present, and the data shows us this, when we train neural connections to be here and now, when we weaken neural connections to the past and the future, we're constantly either ruminating or projecting, we are happier and more productive and more satisfied. So I guess understanding that you have spent a lifetime training your brain to default in a certain pattern, a maladaptive thought pattern, that you can change it. Doesn't happen overnight. It's like going to the gym. You're not going to get in shape overnight. It takes time and consistency, but it is like going to the gym for your brain. And it is incredibly important that you put as much energy into your brain as you do your body. We are a society that's very quick to go to the gym, we work out, we look at our nutrition, yet we don't put that time and energy, the same type of time and energy, into the brain itself. In the ASU lifelong learning classes I teach, I had a doctor who just retired. He was a family physician for 47 years. And he said to me at the end of the very first lecture, he goes, I'm blown away. And he goes, because, you know, I've retired. I still run 6 miles every day. I watch my nutrition. Why don't I put as much energy into my mind as I've been putting into my body? And that's really kind of where we're at. We have to recognize that both are critical and both are incredibly integrative. And so we've got to work on both of those. So Amanda, Abby, do I have any questions so far? Is everybody just spellbound? Okay, we're
No
good.
comments, no comments so far, Jamie, but I just want to say I'm glad that you just ended that with we're not alone because this whole time I was like, I actually messaged Amanda. I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm above average when it comes to getting lost in my thought for 47% of the
No,
day. I'm above
no.
average. I'm not alone." No, we're
You
doing
are not
great.
alone. And I think that's a funny thing is that I think a lot of times we think, and especially same thing happens with students. And again, you guys listen, this is everyone. I'm going to be speaking to all of the superintendents and administrative folks around the state for schools. I'm doing the nurses convention. I don't care what field we're in. We have a tendency to think that I'm the only one that experiences this, or I'm the only one going through this, and we're not. We're not. This is, like I said, a very, very hard world. There's a lot of generalized anxiety, especially after coming from COVID, and we see everything happening around the world. We're not alone. Everyone is experiencing this to certain degrees. And so to realize that you're not alone is critical. I mean, I know that you know that even with students, one of the biggest things I can tell them is that, reach out and look for the support because you are not an isolated island. We are all going through these different things, and some people are struggling more than others, but you're not alone. You're not alone. So I love, thank you, Abby, for adding that. That was perfect. I didn't even pay her. That was perfect. Okay. Okay. So the question is, well, how do we change this, right? We have to train the brain. Just like I said, the amount of energy we put into the body, we need to be able to put into the brain as well. You've all been here, right? Like life is totally under control. Everything is perfect. You're taking a selfie with your bestie and then it just goes to pot, right? And so think about how many times have you said this? And I know you guys, I teach this, right? I write curriculum for this and I still do this. I'm like, if I can just get through this day, my life's going to be so much easier. If I can get through this project, my life will be so much easier. If I can get through this semester, oh my gosh, my life will be so much easier. Is it? Of course it's not, right? Because again, that's not the way that life functions. And that's one of the things I got to tell you that I love about our program. When we do pre and post data, and I've been really lucky to go around the world and share this, is that when students come into our courses, happiness will be here and stress will be here. When they leave our course, happiness is up here, but stress is still here. We are not pretending like stress is going to leave. It won't. You're not going to write out of this presentation or a course that we teach, on a unicorn that farts rainbows. I mean, that's just not the world we live in. The reality is you're going to have stress in your life. It's what is your perception of it? Is it a challenge or do you allow it to hinder you? Is it an opportunity to really learn more about who you are and develop resiliency? Or is it an opportunity just to kind of lay down and say, I give up, right? I mean, it's all perspective and it's all choice. So we got to look at the brain. And when I talk about the brain, it's just three very simple portions we're going to look at. The reptilian brain is the oldest portion. That's why it's called reptilian. It's your brainstem, autonomic features, heart rate, respiration. Second oldest is mammalian brain. It's known as the limbic region. It's emotional regulation. It's also going to be like where memory is located, the hippocampus. We also have the amygdala. It's that gatekeeper to fear and anxiety. And our newest portion is the neocortex, and it's going to be critical thinking, cognitive thought. So think about these three sections. When all three sections, the brainstem, the limbic region, and the neocortex are working together, they're communicating, your nervous system's in something known as rest and digest. It's parasympathetic. So your immune system's working really well, you're sleeping really well, you eat your food and you digest it really well. Like literally, people, this is the stage of life I'm at right now. If I just sleep well and I can poop, I am just the happiest camper on the planet, right? But we need to be here for the body to be able to do this. And this is it's called the rest and repair system. We want the body to be in parasympathetic as much as possible. But there is something opposite of this that is just as critical for survival. And it's known as sympathetic, fight or flight. Now look at this again. When we're in parasympathetic, again, all three portions right here of the brain are communicating with one another. Neocortex with limbic with brainstem. But when we move into sympathetic or fight or flight, we disconnect this neocortex and we go in a primitive loop between the limbic and the brainstem. Why do we do that? The brain is perceiving a threat. Now, this is really important. It is a perception, and this is going to vary from people because it can be a physical threat, it can be a psychological threat, it can be a spiritual threat, but it's a threat that you are feeling like is coming and compromising your safety. So let's say, for example, you got a physical threat. You walked out of wherever you're at today, and there are a horde of zombies coming your way. Does your brain want you to stand there and go like, gosh, like, why are there zombies? Like, I'm going to call Abby or Amanda and to see if they have zombies outside their door. Like, the zombies eat you, right? Like your brain doesn't want you to do this. It wants you to get away from the threat. That's why it disconnects that neocortex, that critical thinking. It wants you to react. Once you are safe, it'll come back to homeostasis. It'll get the neocortex back online. And it's like, friend, process away. But in the midst of where the threat is, again, physical, psychological, or spiritual, it is not going to allow you to do this. Now, look what else happens that's interesting. Two systems are put on the back burner, your digestive and immune system. Why? They are not needed for immediate survival. Now, this again is very, very effective if you are in the midst of something that could potentially harm this human organism. So listen, if you're being chased like by a velociraptor, go into fight or flight. I think that is a very valid response. But if you are just chronically stressed, if you're overwhelmed with work, your relationships, finances, then this is something you really have to look at, because think about it. If you are chronically stressed, that means you're chronically reactive. You've disengaged the neocortex. It means that you put the digestive and immune system on the back burner. I mean, your immune system is your number one defense against disease. Listen, the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, estimate that 80% of all visits, think about this, 80% of all visits to primary care physicians are for stress-related complaints and disorders. I'm getting sick all the time. I've got headaches. My digestive tract's a mess. I'm constipated. I have diarrhea. I'm not sleeping. And they'll go, what is going on in your life? Because if you're chronically stressed, you're not allowing the body to do the job that it needs to do as far as the immune system nor the digestive system. So we come back to this, like, what are the tools that we have that help us make sure that we have balance with all three portions of the brain? And again, we approach it through mindfulness. Now, I did test this with Amanda. So the sound should work. You might have to turn it up on your own computer, but this is why mindfulness is so beneficial when we're looking at getting the brain and that neuroplasticity, rewiring it so that we have tools to self-regulate. So here we go.
There is a story, usually attributed to the Native American tradition, which illuminates different ways of paying attention. An elder, talking to a child, says, "I have two wolves fighting in my heart. One wolf is fearful, vengeful, envious, resentful, and deceitful. The other wolf is compassionate, loving, generous, truthful, and peaceful." The child asks, "Which wolf will win the fight?" The elder responds, "The one I feed." That doesn't mean we try to deny or hurt or kill the angry wolf. If we did that, we'd end up in a long battle, all the while somehow making that wolf more powerful through our hostility and fear. Hating that wolf sucks the strength right out of us. Instead, we calmly pay attention to the angry wolf and let go of believing they have the answers. If we can do that, they end up lying down next to us, no longer an enemy. We help strengthen the kind and loving wolf, giving it nourishment and support so that we can follow it. That peaceful wolf can become our steady companion and show us the way through all kinds of different life experiences. Restful or chaotic, enjoyable or disappointing experiences may come and go, but we can have a guide with us through it all. This is what mindfulness can help you do. Mindfulness allows us to see our thoughts and feelings as they are beginning. It's very powerful to know what we're feeling as we're feeling it, know what we're thinking as we're thinking it. With mindfulness, we can choose what will strengthen and bring into action, and we can choose what we will gently let go of. We don't have to be at the mercy of old habits or old ways of thinking or old ways of being. We are empowered. It just takes practice.
Isn't that great? And that's really what the whole goal is. It's that you recognize, listen, again, the body is a precursor for where the mind is about to go. Let's say you suffer from anxiety. We all have, you've got anxiety, you can feel it, your heart rate's starting to increase, maybe your stomach feels kind of sick or you're clenching your fists. If you're paying attention to your body, and think about that stat we heard, 47% of the day we're lost in thought. if we're present and we're aware of what the body is doing, it is a precursor for where the mind is about to go and the emotions that are going to follow. So if we recognize that anxiety is building, instead of allowing it to take control and take over, we can step back and say, okay, listen, I'm becoming anxious. Okay, what can I do about that? Well, I'm going to do some breath work. I'm going to step back. Let me do some breathing. Let me just take a moment so I can get balance back in the brain. Because the minute we can get balance back in the brain, we are now back in control. It doesn't mean that we say, oh, anxiety is terrible. I mean, please know any emotion you consider a challenging or hard emotion is a very valid emotion. It is there for your survival. And again, it's there for you to respect and to recognize. But the minute you own it, again, it cannot control you. You get to control it. You get to decide how far you want to go with it. So what are ways we can self-regulate? The breath is really powerful. I call it the informal and the formal breath. Now, the informal breath is when you recognize that you are being triggered, you're becoming anxious or angry or scared. And so you can say to yourself, I'm becoming triggered. Maybe it's traffic, maybe it's an email. Who knows what it could be? But the minute you say, okay, do I need to go here? Well, let me do some breath work. And I'm going to tell you why breath work works. Now, I told you when I first started my grad program, the first thing they said is, we're going to breathe, but they couldn't tell me why. And for me, I was like, I need to know the why. Like, what is going on physiologically that's making that psychological change? And so when you do breath work, for example, a 4-4-4 box breath, or the 4-7-8, which is made very popular by Dr. Andrew Weil. When you do this breath work, what you're doing is, let's say you're inhaling for the 4-4-4, you inhale through the nose for a count of 4, you hold for a count of 4, you exhale through the mouth for a count of 4. The minute you do that big inhale through the nose, you trigger a nerve called the vagus nerve. It is a nerve that innervates all these other nerves in the body. So then it interfaces with the parasympathetic nervous system and says, hey, listen, we can step back. We can calm down. Think about when you're in the hospital and you're getting blood drawn. Take a nice deep breath. The nurses will ask you, take a deep breath, exhale, because they recognize it's, again, clinically the fastest way to calm the nervous system. Same thing with pain management. We focus on our breathing. When someone's having a panic attack, what do we tell them to do? We tell them to breathe. Again, we know that we can calm the nervous system down. This is excellent to use in little things in life. It can be, again, that email that you get from someone, or you get a conversation that really triggered you. It could be traffic. I don't know about you, but sometimes traffic will just totally put me over the edge. Let me tell you, I have gotten so much better over the years, but there was a point many years ago where I got in a drag race with a Prius and I was in a minivan. It is not something I'm proud of, right? But it happens. And I had my daughter, my youngest daughter, she's on a study abroad right now to Spain. She's an ASU student, but she is well aware, like your family, they know how to trigger you. She has grown up with me doing this. And so she'll do something that puts me over the edge. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to be a really good mom and I'm going to do my breathing. And I start doing my breathing. And then she's like, oh, are you going to breathe now? And you guys, she's still alive and she's on a study abroad. So that shows you that this can work. It just takes extra breathing, right? So it's recognizing what are the things that trigger you and when can you use this. So this is informal because I'll have students, a lot of students will have test anxiety. A lot of the professionals I work with might have presentation anxiety. The minute we have any kind of anxiety like that, test anxiety, presentation anxiety, we disconnect the neocortex, we become highly reactive. We're not accessing, everything, all the neural connections we've created for that presentation or studying for that exam. So the minute you breathe and get balance back in the brain, you perform better. So informal breath can be done anywhere at any time. Now, the formal breath, though, and I call this the formal practice. Meditation is one that we're all very familiar with, but listen, it does not have to be meditation. It's any activity where you're training the brain to be present. That means any meditative activity. And I'm going to go into different things we can do. We know as little as 2 weeks of 10 to 15 minutes a day literally change the brain. That's that term neuroplasticity. We actually see people who practice a meditative practice, and I'll talk about what they can be. When they do this for 10 to 15 minutes a day, it's like they're going to the gym for the brain. They literally thicken the neocortex. That's that critical thinking and cognitive thought. And within the limbic region, they actually shrink the amygdala. That's that gatekeeper to fear and anxiety. They become less anxious, less fearful, and they actually increase the hippocampus. That's memory and learning. So we see these folks who practice this become more responsive. They become better at learning and memory, and they're much, much, much less reactive with fear and anxiety. So what are things we can do to do this? this, and again, it's got to be a daily practice. It can be something like a meditation, a guided meditation. I put Headspace on here because it's a very popular one. There are so many that are out there now, though. It's nice to have a guided meditation when you first start, because a lot of times you're not really sure what's supposed to happen. Let me just tell you right now, in meditation, the goal is not to have a completely quiet brain. Your brains are not wired like that. Your brains will probably never be completely quiet. There might be moments you're more still than others, but we are wired to constantly be thinking. Meditation and mindfulness is not stopping thoughts, it's catching thoughts before they become storylines that hijack your present moment. That is it. So you recognize when you go through something like a guided meditation with Headspace or Calm or any of the others, that they're asking you to pay attention to your senses, and that when you have a thought, recognize the thought, but then come back to the breath. Because again, you're going to have thoughts. The goal is that you're catching them before they create these storylines that take us into a ruminative or projective pattern. But you know, I got to be honest, a lot of people cannot sit and meditate, and that's completely fine. A lot of the first responders I work with in the graduate program for Homeland Security, they suffer from PTSD, moral injury. They cannot sit and meditate, so I have them use their bodies to calm their mind. They're called somatic or moving meditations, things like yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong. Because if you've ever participated in a yoga class, it's about stretch, movement, and breath. If you're in a tree pose, trust me, you are not thinking about what's for dinner. You are just trying to maintain your balance and focus on the breath. So it's the body getting the mind back into alignment. But if you're like, Jamie, I refuse, I shall not meditate, nor will I move my body. Listen, there's so many other things you can do. You can focus on your senses. It's a brain hack. The minute we focus on our senses, the brain has to be present because it's gathering information from the outside to make sure that you're safe, sensory data. So we do this all the time in therapy. When someone gets into a maladaptive thought pattern, we'll say, hey, stop. What are 5 things that you see? What are 4 things that you can feel? What are 3 things that you hear? What are 2 things you can smell? And what is one emotion that you're experiencing? I know we can go with taste, but a lot of times maybe we don't have something to taste. What's an emotion that you're experiencing? So again, focusing on senses is a really powerful way to train the brain. So that means you can take the dog for a walk in the morning, and instead of having your ear pods in, you just walk and you're like, well, you know, what does it feel like as I hit the pavement or the grass or the sun on my skin or the wind? And what am I hearing? What am I smelling? And so again, you're training the brain to be here and now. When you get into a thought pattern that's not serving you, whether it's projection or rumination, you say to yourself, okay, again, what are 5 things I see? What are 4 things I feel? What are 3 things I hear? What are 2 things I can smell? And what am I feeling right now? And then what happens? Your beautiful brain goes right back to that thought that you had, right? And then what do? You pull it back. It takes time to weaken the connections you created. It takes time to build the neural connections to here and now. Other things you can do is you can journal. This is a beautiful way, a very great self-reflective way to look at what are some of the things that you're experiencing. We know that gratitude journals are very powerful. There is a study out of Stanford that showed one group, when they'd wake up in the morning, they'd write down 5 things that they're grateful for. And then the other group would do nothing. The group that would write down the 5 things they are grateful for and then reread it before they went to bed for 3 weeks were happier 6 months post than the group that did nothing. So I would challenge you when you wake up tomorrow morning, instead of going through your to-do list, which we all do, right? Take 30 seconds and just like, what are things you're grateful for? Gosh, my bed's so comfortable. I'm so grateful, you know, that I have strong legs to carry me through the day, or I have a family that I love, or I have a job that I'm excited to go to. But really start focusing on the gratitude in your life. And you can also make it an art journal. And, you know, this is your journey, your practice. You got to figure out what really connects with you. It can be art. And when I say art, I know I'm showing art here. I mean, it could be something as simple as coloring, or it could be sewing. It could be cooking. I mean, cooking is art. It could be photography. Art is what it gets you into that state of flow where you're very, very present in the activity that you're doing. And again, it's very personal. You got to figure out what works for you. And bottom line, listen, you can do this anywhere at any time. And it can be taking a shower, cooking, it can be writing, it can be driving to work. It's just you purposely making the choice to focus on the senses and keep the brain here and now. The final thing I would say is gratitude. I mean, what's good? It's really, really easy to find the hardship, the scarcity in our life, but really start focusing on the flip side of it. What's good? What do I have? What is my abundance that I do have? You know, my Stress 2 course, that I offer for the undergrads, one of the assignments are pay it forward acts of gratitude. And so the students have to either do something kind for someone else, and it doesn't have to be big, be holding the door, or an act of gratitude could be reaching out to someone who's made an impact in their life and just telling them, thank you for making this impact. And so I had a student actually reach out to her parents in California, and she called them and she was like, Mom, Dad, I just want to thank you for everything you've done. I wouldn't be at the university if it wasn't for you. You supported me financially, emotionally. I'm really, really grateful for you. And I wanted to let you know that. So what did her parents do? They thought something had to be wrong. So they immediately drove to Arizona, and she dragged them to class with her. And she's like, look who showed up because I called and said thank you. And I'm like, oh, who's not saying thank you enough, right? Okay, so it looks like there might be a couple of things in chat. What do we have? I'm excited.
In reference, when you were talking about the 4-4-4 box breath and the 4-7-8 breath, just for clarification, that's to help one shift out of that fight or flight response, correct?
Yes, it's the quickest way when you recognize you're being triggered. Because here's the deal, you're going to get triggered, right? You're going to become angry or anxious or depressed, whatever's happening. When you recognize it's happening, instead of letting yourself go into the full flow emotion of it, like we all been here. Think about anger. Anger builds, like if you can recognize you're getting angry, we all know there's a line that we cross, right? So like up to that line, we have the ability to self-regulate, step back, and make a more responsive decision. But man, the minute we cross that line, like we become the Incredible Hulk, like we don't care if the Pope is watching, right? What's happening around you. And I know this is true because I have done this. And then later we completely regret it. And you know what we say to ourselves? Why did I do that? Why did I behave that way? What was I thinking? Guess what? You were not thinking, right? You had disconnected that neocortex. So that 4-4-4, the box breath, or the 4-7-8, what you're doing is you're getting regulation back with the brain. You're getting that vagus nerve to interface with the parasympathetic nervous system to say, hey, listen, we can calm down. We can self-regulate. We can make a decision of how we want to handle this without being reactive. And I tell you, it's a skill and it's kind of a superpower because it is really easy to step over that line of reactivity and then do things that we regret. It is much harder to start paying attention to the body, say, hey, I don't necessarily have to go here. Let me step back and let me calm myself. The one thing I'm going to say about breath work, it's just like with meditative practices and meditations, there are so many out there. It doesn't cost money. Go onto YouTube. The 4-4-4 is just a really simple one because it's easy to remember. Breathe in for 4, pause, breathe out for 4. The 4-7-8, you're breathing in for 4, you're pausing for 7, you're exhaling for 8. You have to figure out what works for you. And so you can just Google breath work and to see what is something that's really easy. It's a really great default for you when you recognize you're going into a triggered pattern. Did that answer it, Abby?
It absolutely did.
Okay, cool. Okay, then do we have others? Some people are like, oh, I breathe every day, right?
There was another question. Can you speak a bit more to acceptance of when you cannot control / affect the communication style of others?
Oh, totally. Listen, you guys, we love to control. Like as a parent, I can tell you, I would love to control every part of my daughter's lives. Can I? I absolutely cannot. I cannot. You know who the only person you can control is yourself. You cannot control other people. You cannot control how they behave. And this is when I talked about modeling. When you're able to step back and realize that the only power you truly have is over yourself and how you respond, it is more impactful than anything, trust me, anything you can be saying to anyone else. If they're flying off the hook or they're not communicating the way that you would prefer they communicate, you can't fix that. You can't change that. You cannot control what they're doing. Now, you can address your boundaries, right? Professional and personal, and you can make sure that you have the boundaries that are healthy for you, but you stay calm. You cannot force anyone to be anything or do anything. We spend so much energy on trying to control people and situations in our lives. Think about if you took that energy and you put it back inward to what you really truly can control. And sometimes that's just acceptance. It is what it is. You may not like it. It may not be pleasant, but how are you going to handle it in a responsive way? Did that help? Yeah?
I think so. We got to thank you.
Okay. So I'm gonna go on and then hope we'll have a few more minutes at the end that we can chat some more. So I wanted to show this final, because we're almost there. I want to show this final video. This might actually help. I love it. And it's why mindfulness is a superpower. Let's watch this.
You may have heard this word mindfulness. It's become something of a buzz phrase of late. I'm going to give you one simple, serviceable definition, which is this. Mindfulness is the ability to know what's happening in your head at any given moment without getting carried away by it. Imagine how useful this could be. Just as an example, you're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off in traffic. How do you normally react? I think most of us, we normally react by having a thought, which is, I'm pissed. And then what happens next? You immediately, habitually, reflexively inhabit that thought. You actually become pissed. There's no buffer between the stimulus and your reaction. With just a little bit of mindfulness, in that same situation, you might notice my chest is buzzing, my ears are turning red, I'm having a starburst of self-righteous thoughts, I'm getting angry. But you don't necessarily have to act on it and chase that person down the road, screaming at them with your kids in the back of the car thinking you've gone nuts. Now, you might be thinking, don't I need to get angry sometimes? Aren't I justified? I would say yes, but probably not as much as you think. The proposition here is not that you should be rendered by mindfulness into some lifeless, non-judgmental blob. The proposition is that you should learn how to respond wisely to things that happen to you, rather than just reacting blindly. And that, my friends, is a superpower. How do you get it? The way to get it is through meditation. I believe that meditation and mindfulness are the next big public health revolution. In the 1940s, if you told somebody you were going running, they would have said, who's chasing you? But then what happened next? The scientists swooped in, they showed that physical exercise is really good for you, and now all of us do it, and if we don't, we feel guilty about it. And that's where I think we're headed with mindfulness and meditation. It's going to join the pantheon of no-brainers like brushing your teeth, eating well, and taking the meds your doctor prescribed for you. Let me just close by saying, mindfulness is not going to solve all of your problems. It's not going to render your life a nonstop parade of unicorns and rainbows. Nonetheless, this is a superpower and one that is accessible by you immediately.
Because really, you guys, bottom line, it's a choice, right? It's a choice to do something or do nothing. And it just does not happen overnight. You cannot say, well, I'm going to get in shape. So you get a plan together, right? I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to make sure I do cardiovascular, strength training. I'm going to really watch my nutrition. And in 3 months, I'm going to be in better shape. But then every day you go home and you sit on the couch and you eat Doritos and watch Netflix. You'd be like, well, I can tell you why I'm not in shape. Same thing has to happen with the brain. You can't go, why am I not responding to the world more? Why is my perception not changing if you're not actually putting the work in to get your brain to that point where you're weakening those neural connections that have not benefited you and you're strengthening the neural connections to those that are benefiting you. And I love this quote by Viktor Frankl where he says, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And that space is our power to choose our response, and our response lies our growth and freedom. And so I really want you to think about, what are you doing to create a more responsive brain? What are you personally doing so that you shift the way the brain looks at the world, that you can actually change the brain, that neuroplasticity. Now, I put some websites up here. First is my email, anytime. Email me. I'm so happy to answer questions. There's the thinkjamie.com. Just take a picture of this if you guys are interested. It is just resources. I go out and I do so much community work that a lot of folks are like, well, what are TED Talks you like? What are meditations you like? Everything's free on there, by the way. It's just all resources. It's interviews I've done, TED Talks I like, books that I like. And so you can check it out. And then something I did with my college, it was a survival guide for teachers. And I know it says for teachers, but I think this is good for anyone in life. It's where we created a free resource page. Actually, you get tips weekly that talk about resiliency, neuroplasticity, relationships. And they're just little tips and tricks. And especially you're working with students, for goodness sake, this might actually be really beneficial. But you can look and say, hey, I really want to see what is compassion fatigue? And so again, you can either sign up to get a tip every week. This is totally free as well. We had a huge grant that came in order to help with teacher retention in the state. And my dean knew that I had been a prior teacher. So she pulled me in with a bunch of therapists and we went through and we created this. So it's another just great resource that doesn't cost you a dime. So I'm going to stop the share. Hope everybody got a picture. And now we have I think 5 minutes, right? We can answer some questions. So what questions we have? Because I know I saw questions there.
There's just a lot of great conversation happening in the chat right now, Jamie. Like tons of great. And I love everybody that is sharing their own experiences, sharing their own solutions, things that have worked well for them and their students. I love seeing those.
Yeah.
And a couple people even mentioning maybe I should start practicing again because it's something I haven't been doing, being mindful.
You know, you guys, this is the funny thing is we put self-care on the back burner. We think everything is more important than us. But the reality is you can't give what you don't have. The greatest gift you can give everyone in your life, personally and professionally, is the work that you do for yourself and the time that you take for yourself. I guarantee it, that is the greatest gift you can give this world. And so it is not selfish, it is not a waste of time. It is vital that you do this. It really, truly is. Anything else? I know we have like 1 minute. I mean, I want to be very cognizant and respectful of people's time. But, you know, you guys, again, for me, it's that ultimate pay it forward. This is about you. I'm keynoting on Monday for the superintendents. And it was funny when they first started having me do this, they're like, well, we want you to talk about leadership. And I'm like, dudes, you wouldn't be in the position you're in if you weren't leaders. Like, I will talk about you and how do you develop you, because then that's going to naturally kind of bleed down to your administrative teams, to the different cultures on campuses, but it has to start with you. And that's really what I hope you guys got. I know that you work with these students, but it has to start with you. You need to do this, and it naturally will just be integrated in everything else you do personally and professionally. Okay, are we good?
Well, I think the overwhelming thought is thank you, Jamie,
You're
because this
welcome.
has been great, so insightful and so helpful. So I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with us all and share some really great tips and recommendations for managing stress. I really appreciate it.
Anytime. I mean, I'm totally here for you guys. I'm always happy to come back and talk about other things too. I know I went and did something for fiduciaries. I didn't even know what a fiduciary was, and then for the state, and then now they have me coming back every 3 months so they can maintain their sanity. So always happy to share this, you guys, in all different aspects. Okay.
Well, I know where to find you, so I will
Yes, you
certainly
do.
be reaching out. You're not getting rid of me anytime soon.
No, I hope not. I hope not.
But thank you everyone for joining us. We did record today's presentation, so we'll make sure to share that within the Slack channel community. And yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Jamie or Abby and I, and we're
Absolutely.
happy to get you connected.
Absolutely. And I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your week. Practice your what's good and take care of yourselves. Remember, you can't give what you don't have. It's all about you. Okay.